These first few days of Lent, it's only been a few days now, we kind of hear in the readings of this whole past week really talked about sloth and confusion. Now, sloth, we think of just being lazy, but in the spiritual realm, that's not really what it means. In the spiritual realm, sloth is to refuse the joy that comes from God and to be repelled by divine goodness. That's what happens in the spiritual world. It's a little bit different than we sometimes use the word. It's refusing the grace of God. And when we do that, confusion runs rapidly. They kind of one falls upon the other. Now, I've heard people say sometimes, well, I don't like the God of the Old Testament. I really like the God of the New Testament. Well, that's, God of the Old Testament is thunder and all this kind of stuff. But that's not true. God made a beautiful world, as we heard in that first reading. A beautiful garden. Beautiful to look at, beautiful for food. It was wonderful. And so it's kind of like the first permission. Go and enjoy my creation. And that's how the world started. It didn't start like it is right now. But Satan comes along, and he decides to trick Eve and to begin to bring more of that sloth and confusion into her. God said you can't eat any of these trees. And he said, oh yeah, we can eat of any tree in the garden except for that one in the middle. We can't eat it, and we can't even touch it. God didn't say that. God didn't say don't touch. He said don't eat. Confusion. We start to kind of take God's message in the wrong way. And that, well, you need to eat this because then you'll be like gods. That's the satanic lie. It's an absolute lie. Because they already were like God. Without eating anything, they were like God because they were made in his image and likeness. So Satan comes in and really begins to mess things up. And, with that kind of thinking, that sloth and confusion, it is the devil who messed up the human race, not God. It was Satan himself who encouraged and brought sin into the world, not God. And we have to keep coming back to that. And to do that, we have to have diligence and understanding. Those are two things that can truly help us get through the sloth, through that confusion. And if we jump forward now to those temptations of Jesus, which is usually the gospel and the beginning of Lent, and we see these things. And perhaps if I lived 1,000 years ago, I'm only 800, but if I'd lived 1,000 years ago, I might have had a different thing to talk about. But I think maybe the one we have to focus in a little bit is that particular first temptation, when Jesus says, man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. No, but I don't live 1,000 years ago, neither do you. We live today. And right now, in many ways, the biggest obstacle to our happiness and holiness is the consumeristic mentality, the commercializing of just about everything. We got to have this, we got to have that. It's a mentality that attaches us to the things of the world. And the advertisers know that. They know how to get under our skin. And the commercialistic mentality says, I got to have the right bank account and enough in my bank account. I have to have the right house, the right vacation spot, the right outfit, all those kinds of things. And they are so good at it. They had convinced thousands, millions of people to buy jeans with holes in them. Oy vey. Buying clothes with holes in them. You know, those of us who grew up in the 40s and the 50s and 60s, that was just, whoa. Why would anybody be dumb enough to do that? It's the fashion. See how good they are? See how good those advertisers are? And we buy into that. And that's where that sloth and confusion is so rampant in our society. These things are, they're material things. And like all material things, they cannot give us love. We don't have a relationship with our food, with our clothes. They're just things. They're necessary, that's true, but they're not enough. We need something more. We need to drink of the truth of our beloved God. That's where we have to go. And we hunger for bread, but we need to hunger more for the bread of the Eucharist, the bread of the Word of God. And Satan is always trying to confuse us, trying always to get us looking the wrong way. He doesn't very often show himself in his real nature, but he's always there. So we've got to be careful of listening to that. Well, how can we do that? Well, think about St. Ignatius of Loyola. He was a knight. He loved the battle and the swagger and all that kind of stuff. And one day he was wounded by a cannonball, and he went into rehab. And it was a quite lengthy time of trying to get back to good health. And he was a very intelligent man. And he didn't have any books that he wanted to read. The only books that they could find for him were the Bible and the lives of the saints. He's going, oh, really? Finally, he decided he was bored, so he started to read the scriptures. Started to read about the lives of the saints. And the more he read, the more he studied, he began to see, wait a minute, this is the real world. This is the real way to go. This is the grace of God that comes to us. And through that changing of his mind and soul, he put together a wonderful spiritual method of learning and discerning spirits, and it's still used today. Even companies use that particular model of finding the discernment of spirits. That's what we have to be thinking about. That's how we get rid of the sloth and the confusion. So one of the things that can really help us do that, first of all, is that very kind of behavior. But first of all, to build some new habits. Recommit yourself to Christ. It's one of the great ideas of Lent, that we recommit ourselves. Now, if you don't have to recommit to self, if you didn't commit any sins all year long, you might as well go home. Nobody left. Okay. Because we know, don't we? We know. So, what about taking 15 minutes a day? Just 15 minutes. to sit down and read a religious book, a good one. Maybe Seven-Story Mountain by Thomas Merton, or Diary of a Soul. There's many, many, many out there. Just 15, 20 minutes a day. Read something very spiritual. Turn off your phone. Turn it off. The world can wait for you. You're that important. And maybe we have to learn how to do a lot more of putting our phones away. I mean, have you gone to a restaurant and here's a family, mom, dad, a couple of kids, and their table out to dinner for the family, and they're all on their phones? Really? Really? Is anybody here that important? No. Turn off the phones. Never sit down at the dinner table with your phone, unless you're by yourself. But don't act as if you're by yourself when everybody else is there. So begin to start taming some of that. It doesn't happen automatically. We have to work on it. And, there's lots of good books out there. And for young readers, there's a couple of, a little series of novels that Raymond Arroyo wrote about the Will Ryder series. There's 3 of them. And it's just wonderful. It's about good and evil, time travel, teleportation, and for young readers, they're wonderful. About the amulet of power and the lost staff of wonder. And you learn a lot like that. You learn about spirituality, about the battle between good and evil. And you can have fun doing it. Maybe go on a retreat. I know that's a little bit harder, but that's a possibility. But to have, maybe come to Mass an extra time a week and receive Holy Communion, the true bread of life, the true bread that brings us into the light of God. Those are the things we can do. It's not going to happen by magic. Not going to happen by magic. We saw a little bit of that on Ash Wednesday. We probably had 8,000 or 9,000 people here on Ash Wednesday, and we will not see them again until Palm Sunday. And I told them, if you get your ashes and don't go to Mass on Sunday, it will do you no good. We need to put an energy into this, not to be slothful with the things of God, to end our confusion. That's going to make us a lot holier. And like Christ, we're not going to just strive for worldly bread, but every word that comes from the mouth of God.